Hi everyone, my name is Alfredo Campos, and today I'm going to be covering the importance of education and the Bill of Rights simplified. Education. Education is a highly controversial topic in the sense of its definition because to some it may mean school smarts, study smarts, and being able to comprehend something you just read. To some, it also means experience, wisdom, and skills in order to suffice and make the right decisions in life. But what does it really mean to be educated? Education comes in many forms of the most dangerous weapon that exists in this world, and that weapon is a double edged blade which can do both good and bad depending on how it's used. And you might be wondering, what weapon is this guy talking about? That weapon is knowledge. Knowledge, as the saying goes, knowledge is power, but it is also key. And knowledge comes from a good education that can be given in any shape or form. Life itself educates us in many ways that we never really see until it is made crystal clear to us. And what I mean by this is that life can educate us with many moments that we won't really realize were a form of education until we look back at the moments and say it was a learning experience. Sometimes self-reflection is the best way to learn about yourself and to see the things that you might have missed before, to say to yourself that could have served as a learning experience where you can grow as a person and value the experiences that you had that are now gone. Education also means developing enough knowledge and skill to see beyond what others see and to find its true beauty through its hidden meaning. Education's purpose is meant to be taught to people about everything that exists around us, and with this education comes the skill to be able to make well thought out decisions that are not solely based on emotion alone, but wits, wisdom, and experience altogether. By this, I'm talking about the situations in life where we might have to make a decision that'll affect not just us, but others around us. And we can't just rely solely on emotion and how we feel to make that decision if it'll affect others. The best example I can give for this topic would be voting. Many right now are making decisions based on emotion rather than just factual research, or they let media sway their decisions. But in a situation like this where voting may affect the entire nation, the best way to vote would be through factual research and as well as wisdom, pretty much experience about politics in a sense. But yeah, I mean, this is an example I can give on where this applies, which is voting, which is a big decision that you must make because each vote counts and it might make a difference for the country. Examples of education in the US. Examples of education in the early US can be seen in Frederick Douglass's Learning to Read and Write. This quote stood out because it's an example of how, in this case, through his background, Frederick Douglass was a slave, and slaves at that time in early US did not get an education because they weren't seen as worth being educated. But this didn't stop Frederick Douglass, and due to that, he wanted to get an education, so he did anything he could by his own means to get an education. And this was an example of how important education was to people back then, even if they were held back through slavery. As Douglass writes, this is a dark truth that he had to face once he actually obtained the knowledge he wanted. In a sense, he has a point for what he wrote because sometimes education is good and bad depending on the situations that are being taught. For this instance, in the sense of him being a slave, it opened his eyes to his cruel fate, which was the worst thing that happened at the time. But overall, my point is that education was highly needed at this time, and even if it was given, it came with the cost. And his cost was finding out his situation and understanding what was really going on. Examples of need for education. Now, in current day America, we face a literacy problem, which makes it hard for people to understand what needs to be read as well as to make educated decisions once able to comprehend what they are reading rather than to assume what is being read. A major problem that we have as a nation is as shown in an article by The Hill, Education, Literacy, and the 2020 Campaign. I found in this article that more than 30 million adults in the US can't read or write above a third grade level. 50% of adults in the US can't read a book written at an eighth grade level. And some of these consequences may be seen in that 43% of adults who read below the fifth grade level live in poverty. 70% of adults who are welfare recipients have low literacy skills. You might be wondering, well, what's the problem here? The problem here is that the need for education is much higher because at the time that this article was written, It was before the 2020 campaign, and it just didn't explain the problem with illiteracy skills. It also explained that the need for education was much higher right now because, as it's time already currently to vote, education is what's needed in order to make the proper vote and decision than to just vote on assumptions, emotions, ideas that we see on social media. For the people that don't have literacy skills, or the people that live in poverty, as explained right here, those people won't be able to understand what they're reading in a ballot and might just listen to what people tell them rather than to make their own decisions. And that's the problem where education might need to come in, and it's highly needed. Where can these illiteracy problems be seen? Some of these illiteracy problems are shown in common misconceptions that people have on the Bill of Rights. Misconceptions of the Bill of Rights. According to Psychology Today, some misconceptions are: the Fourth Amendment's ban on unreasonable search and seizures serves only to protect criminals. And to further explain this, when someone is accused for a crime, is released from jail because they were part of an unreasonable search, is usually when people complain that the Fourth is only meant to protect criminals. And by this, it means that it's wrong because they were enacted to protect the innocent from the police or from overstepping their power and searching without the warrant. This prevents any low official from checking and searching without consent or a warrant. Normally nowadays, there are a couple of corrupt cops who tend to do this and overstep their power, and this is what the Fourth stands for, to prevent it. And then the second one is the First Amendment's guarantee of religious freedom. This is a controversial one because in the First Amendment, it establishes that the church and the state are separate powers. And due to this, the Free Exercise Clause and the Establishment Clause were created. And a good example of this would be praying at school. Praying at school is not allowed because it's allowing public prayer of a certain religion in front of everyone else who might or might not have different religions. This violates the Establishment Clause, meaning that one religion cannot overstep another one. While not allowing it also violates the Free Exercise Clause, which means that you can freely believe in any religion. So, in a nutshell, the Establishment Clause and the Free Exercise Clause are very controversial because they always contradict each other. The third one is the First Amendment rights to free speech and peaceful assembly being absolute. The freedom is not absolute because the Supreme Court still has the power to rule press to be held accountable for lawsuit if they are recklessly printing or writing lies about a person or company in this case. But the court can also rule that governments can place restrictions on our freedoms of speech, which is a good thing because, for example, now that we're in the process of voting, people that support a specific political party cannot go around midnight or 3 a.m. driving a truck with a megaphone promoting their political party because it would be seen as violating our freedoms as well. These restrictions are done in a fashion of time, place, and manner because some things should not be said at certain times. Meanwhile, others are all right. The fourth misconception is the wording of the Second Amendment explicitly gives individuals a right to own and carry firearms. This one is usually misunderstood because people think that because it's written in the Bill of Rights, we are allowed to just do it, or that it's our right just because it's written. But throughout time, it was seen as a misunderstood right because at the time that this was written, they allowed people to carry firearms and have their own weapons at home because of what was going on with the British. And if they felt threatened, they were allowed to protect their own private property and their loved ones as well, which is what the cause of the Second Amendment was for. But due to a situation that happened in 2008 where someone was taken to court, the court ruled that people were allowed to carry guns, but the process of legally owning firearms is a lot more tedious now because you go through a lot of background checks in order to get a permit to own a gun. And it's usually a lot of work. But yeah, the Second Amendment is usually really misunderstood and there's a lot of misconceptions. The Bill of Rights simplified. For the last few slides, my goal is to educate you by clarifying the misconceptions on these amendments and to briefly explain what these amendments from the Bill of Rights actually mean and do. So, on the first one, we all know it talks about the freedom of speech, press, religion, assembly, and petition. But the First Amendment protects our rights to say and write our opinions, worship how we please, assemble peacefully, and petition the government if we feel the need. So, the Second Amendment, in a nutshell, just protects and grants the right to keep and bear arms. So, the Fourth Amendment. What the Fourth Amendment protects and grants, in a nutshell, is unreasonable searches and seizures. So what the Fourth Amendment does is that it's a right to search and seizure, meaning that the police can't come into our home. And with that, that is all that I have for you today. I hope that from this presentation, you can take how important it is to be educated and to understand your rights. From this section, I really wanted to cover the importance of literacy and how important it is to understand your rights, even if you don't understand what you're reading. I wanted to clarify some of the misconceptions from the amendments from the Bill of Rights, as well as to simplify those amendments and what they actually mean for those who might not have actually understood it. But also to give some background on the importance of education and why literacy is important when it comes to understanding your rights as an American. And hopefully with this video, I can educate some of those who may not have understood it, but also clarified some of the things that you may have not have understood and the misconceptions that may exist at this point. Apart from the misconceptions, I hope that I promoted a little bit of education and the importance of education with some history of how important education was and how it impacted the United States and its foundations. That was about all I had to say. Thank you for watching this presentation. And with that, I hope that some of you who are planning to vote, please vote. Every vote matters. You have the power to make a difference. So please vote. And if you do, make it an educated vote, because I just voted. Will you?